identity and law is that insidiously and surreptitiously inculcated family in our psyche by the dominant culture of coloniality. And sometimes it makes those who are a numerical majority in their country, but a cultural minority in terms of economic redistribution. And many of us who are lawyers do not realize that even though we are black and a majority in countries where we live, we are a cultural minority in regard to education that we imbibe and the laws that we are taught. And as lawyers, we are called upon to be courageous in the pursuit of justice. And to theorize about justice, because many of us taught in white schools, in white universities, liberal universities, regard Africa as a place that could not develop knowledge. We could be wherever you are in the continent, even in West Africa. Africans have been taught that Europeans arrived here and found people who had no systems. And it is for that reason that we are uncritical of liberal theory about law, and we accept it, and we write no books for our people. We write no laws that are rooted in the experiences of our people, because we regard knowledge as Western and Africans as wheelbarrows into which Eurocentric knowledge must be poured. Of course, we have to be remunerated as lawyers because we must survive. But that is not our greatest task, because we must guard against the pursuit and worshipping of the pagan god in society called money. It is the money that has divided even those who don't have the money, who live in societies that are called independent and free, when actually they have nothing. It is in that context that I speak out, almost to my detriment sometimes, because when you speak against things that people have taken for granted, you have to accept the consequences of speaking truth to that kind of dominant power. The first African Chief Justice of Democratic South Africa, Justice Pius Langa, left all of us in the continent with words that should encourage every lawyer across the board, particularly here, as I will talk to you about where Namibia comes from. He said this in a lecture where he called The Emperor's New Clothes. This is before he died. And I quote, he said, "Sometimes the simplest act of dissent can change the course of history. Sometimes the dissenter is the lone voice of reason in the dark. There will be some who will privately agree with a dissenter, be it Galileo or a Ken Saro-Wiwa in Nigeria, a Rosa Parks in the US, or a Mo in religious circles. The value and courage of dissent comes in standing up and pronouncing the difficult view in public and taking the consequences. It is easy to believe in something. It must be more difficult to speak out." Close quote. He dwells on this subject, quoting one of the probably sharpest revolutionaries that emerged in South Africa, an Afrikaner man, a silk, a senior counsel, whose colleagues instigated that he should be struck off the roll for standing with the poor, for standing with African masses. Bram Fischer, it's the General Counsel of the Bar that actually instigated that he should be struck off for siding with people they called savages because they were black. And he said this at the time when they were striking him off in court. Bram Fischer said this, he was a dissenter of note, like all lawyers should be. He says, "When an advocate does what I have done, his conduct is not determined by any disrespect for the law, nor because he hopes to benefit personally by any offense he may commit. On the contrary, it requires an act of will to overcome his deeply rooted respect for legality. And he takes the step only when he feels that whatever the consequences to himself, his political conscience no longer permits him to do otherwise. He does it not out of a desire to be immoral, but because to act otherwise would, for him, be immoral." I make these references because we all live as lawyers under the guise of the so-called rule of law. which is often paraded in the legal and judicial profession as politically neutral and valueless concepts, so that we are lulled into submission and acceptance of the condition of injustice, inequality, and coloniality that is paraded as a separate science of law unrelated to the political conditions of our people. It's the biggest lie in the world to separate law from politics of the people. It is a story told by those who control the means of knowledge, the means of production, so that the others can live in poverty. They force us to conform and to sacrifice justice at the altar of career ambitions to become judges, to be rich, or simply to become individuals that are wealthier than our communities. Our understanding of history should drive us to contextualize our practice of law, not simply as the pursuit of individual wealth, but equitable distribution of wealth and natural resources, largely of countries where colonizers, foreign colonizers, plundered natural resources. It is our challenge against the systemic inequality broadly than our pursuit of individual survival. And many lawyers live their lives trying to survive as individuals with no knowledge that the poverty they suffer is a product of the broader poverty of their people. Our understanding of history should drive us to challenge not just things that happen in our little corners, but the systemic inequalities in the society we live. And we must be rooted in the most unfortunate, poor, uneducated, and on the margins of the human condition. Because of the settler colonial history of Namibia, it is important to start any discussion about law with obvious questions regarding race, law, and decoloniality as intertwined components that have reinforced each other for centuries. And Namibia comes from a history of twin colonial powers, with Germany leading the force in the 18th century, and apartheid South Africa as if it were not enough. There's a whole new study in these countries of comparative law that looks at what happened to indigenous people. Present-day Namibia, for instance, as I said, comes from two dark periods of coloniality by German and apartheid South Africa, whose occupation was unlawful. Both interrupted Namibia's own path to modernity based on its own pre-colonial societal organization. It was a major turning point, the point that you have not been able to change. And of course, I don't say this because the struggles of SWAPO and everybody else that sacrificed Andimba Choivo Datoivo, Sam Nyoma, the comrades here, it's a struggle that can never be replaced. But it's a struggle against a force that was here for years, for centuries, and it takes time to remove. And if lawyers cannot be at the forefront of changing those conditions that affect ordinary people, and they believe that being a lawyer is a new way of serving the pagan god called money, our people will remain on the margins of the human condition forever. And we must ask, as lawyers, we must assess that in a population like this one of over 3 million people, the people of Namibia, are they the ones who enjoy the major centers of the economy? And whether there is equitable distribution of legal work within the system. And if not, we must ask, why would a post-colonial environment maintain the same wealth patterns and distribution of the economy that it inherited from its colonial past? Why would it remain the same after 1990, when the so-called independence in the 90s came and the earlier had come in the 60s for Africa? And as a lawyer, you cannot really practice meaningfully without understanding that historical context of why you are involved in a job in which you must ensure justice. Well, Namibia comes from that history. It was called Southwest Africa then. To the credit of the Namibians, at least, more than where I come from, at least you were brave enough even to reject the name that your colonizers called you. It's an important symbolic gesture of rejecting the identity given to you by those who colonized you. It looks unimportant, but it's important to reject the name by which your colonizer called you, because your children must know that you stood up and renamed, reimagined yourself. I can't boast about that about my country. South Africa, because I think we are a little polite towards those who colonized us. We do not want to offend them. We changed the names of our holidays when our people were massacred. We call them by polite names so that we don't offend the very people that despise us, the very people that cause huge, huge suffering for our people. Well, that's just my own country. Colonial expansion here in Namibia and every other African territory became more formalized in the 1880s. And of course, the treaty between Portugal and Germany soon after the Berlin Conference ushered in a solid boundary, for instance here, between Namibia and Angola. This foreign disruption along the Kavango River, unlawful acquisition of territory that belonged to indigenous people, caused border disputes amongst the people and continues, though invisible, in how the economy works. It continues to cause havoc in the lives of ordinary people in far-flung areas, even here. And everywhere you go, you would still find people who live in the same conditions they lived in before 1990. The Germans slowly penetrated this area and the areas of Owambo, Caprivi, Kaoko, and Kavango, seeking to exploit natural resources. And of course, later, the South Africans, greedy Afrikaner minority, settled here as if it was not enough for the Germans to take your identity, and took more. I do not know, you know better, whether they've returned what they took. Colonialism would not even be possible without seeking relations with local